Okay.
Okay, so thank you everyone for being with us for the entire day. This is the last session, and I'm going to talk about how to build React app for Dataverse. Now, we have been talking about PCF all day. We have spoken to PCF engineering team about what's the vision, and at some point we are going to go to a point where we might not need web resources, but until then, we still have an option of doing web resources, and we don't have the virtual components or virtual PCF controls yet in the play. So until then, what's our what? How can we build applications? Why do we need? We still need web resources. So why do we need React app, and how it can provide an easy functionality to create web resources for Dataverse, and that's what this particular session is all about. So it's not about PCF, but we have learned a lot from PCF, and that's what is driving this particular session. Okay, next slide. So what are we going to see in this particular session? We are going to create a React app and then add and configure prettier on that React app. And after that, we're going to do some changes so that we can deploy it to Dataverse as a web resources. And then create some components on it. And these are UI components that I'm talking about, and we are going to see how those components would lay out. And then we are going to configure Fluent UI, and we have seen Fluent UI. We have heard Fluent UI. We saw it in Scott's session as well, where he was using some of the controls as Fluent UI, which makes things easier, which makes your life so easier to use it. So we're going to configure that and then build our app and then deploy, and then eventually, if time permits, we'll also see how we can debug the web resources. Okay, so let's see why do we really need a React app for building our HTML web resources. Now, HTML web resources is available for us today, and so actually this is, you can see that it's a copy paste, and I forgot to change the subtitle, and that happens when you do copy paste, right? But anyway, so why you need a React app to build your HTML web resources? Just because React app provides you with like ability to create complex UI with less efforts. You can use this npm packages like Fluent UI, which is built by Microsoft, which goes and provides you this controls, which adheres to the accessibility and gives you a nice user look and feel. And it looks like if you're building it for model-driven app, it looks an HTML web resources will be embedded in model-driven app, right? So you want that look and feel of your app to look like the model-driven app look and feel, and that's what the Fluent UI would provide. So that's why we can use React app. Then when you're building React app, it allows you to build these components which can be on same page, but you can separate the UI components altogether. So for example, like you can have the header component, and then the body component, and the footer component, and then you can use this header components on various pages, so you can reuse the components and you don't have to recreate those components. So you can separate the components and then reuse the components. That's the main thing about using React app, and that's what I like about it. And then once you create and once you build a React app, it creates separate files as you would have done it in the regular app. Like if you have built a regular HTML web resources, you would have built a CSS and a JavaScript. So it's gonna do the same thing. Once you build a React app, it's gonna create an HTML page which gets deployed as an HTML web resources, but also create a JavaScript which separates the code piece or scripting piece, and then creates a CSS, which is your styling piece, right? So same things, but then using the React app. So let's go and look at the demo. And what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to bring up a Visual Studio Code, and which is opening up a empty folder here, right? And in this empty folder, I'm going to use a terminal and write the command. So first command that you want to write is to create a React app. So the command to create a React app is going to be npx create React app. Oh, typing correctly. Okay, I'm going to delete and recreate. Npx create React app, and then you give the name of the app. Now the naming of the app has you have to give small cases. It doesn't allow you to add any upper cases when you're naming your React apps. So here I'm going to say this is just for the demo. And then after that, if you just run this command, it will create a React app, but it will create a JavaScript version of the React app. Now I'm more of a TypeScript guy than a JavaScript. I have made that transition a couple of years ago, and I really like TypeScript. So I'm going to use the TypeScript template. And React actually provides a few other templates. And one of the template is the TypeScript template. So you say template and say TypeScript, and then you hit enter. Now this is what this is going to do is this is going to create a folder in this particular directory, and then initiate the React app for you. Now it takes a little bit longer, so I'm not going to wait for it to complete that processing and then just jump over to the app I've already created. So this is the app I've already created, and let me go to some of my files. So next thing is we are going to install Prettier. Now, the reason why we want to install Prettier is just because it makes your code consistent across your developers. So if you are developing this as a project and you have a group of developers, each developer would practice their own coding standards. Like I might do 2 spaces for a tab, whereas someone might do 4 spaces for a tab. And then someone might put curly braces after the function name, but someone would do curly braces on the next line of the function name. So things like that. And so what happens is eventually when you're reviewing the code, it's not consistent across. So if you're looking at one code file and then you look at the code, oh, then you know, okay, this code has been done by Danish, and it looks pretty bad, right? And then you look at the other file and then that code has been done by Scott. You really recognize who's doing the code just by looking at how the patterns are, right? And you don't want that. You want consistent development across, and all the files should look consistent. So that's why Prettier helps you achieving that. And it's pretty simple. So and it's a npm package that you have to install. So you say npm install, and then you say Prettier. Hope I've spelled it right. And then Prettier is something that is going to be a dev dependency. Now, what I mean by dev dependency is it's only going to be used when you're developing. This particular package is not going to be it's not going to be required when you're running the application. So end users doesn't need this package to run the application, but developers would need this package to develop stuff, because it's going to do this code restructuring to make it look consistent across, right? So we are going to say we don't need to install this as the application dependency, but by default it is application dependency, but we want to install this as a dev dependency. So to make sure that it installs as a dev dependency, we have to give an attribute called save dev. The second attribute that we want to give, and this is only on the Prettier, is save exact. Now, save exact is another attribute of the npm package, which tells the installer to install the exact version of the Prettier across all the developers. So because this particular thing, when it gets installed, so I'm going to hit install. When it gets installed, the package.json gets a record of it. And you would see that in the dev dependency. Where did it go? Or maybe it's not. It's okay. There you go. So you see how it says it installed the exact version 2.3.0. Now, if it has, it doesn't have an exact version, it will have this particular a triangle or I don't know what that symbol is called, but you'll have that kind of a symbol on the packages, which will say, okay, that's the lowest version, and then just do the upgrades on top of that lowest version. Whatever the latest version is available, just get that whenever you do npm install. But here we're saying only use 2.3.0. What happens is, because this is recorded in the package.json, and let's say a new developer comes in and the prettier has already upgraded to say 2.4, right? So when you do npm install, you can, so the developer would not get the 2.4.0 version, but rather get 2.3.0 version, because 2.4.0 version might have some differences in terms of how it changes the code or how it formats the code. And you don't want that, because if that happens, if the developer starts changing things, even if he didn't do anything, he would see a lot of differences in the code, just because how prettier is functioning, and you don't want that kind of changes in your code reviews, right? So that's why we do code exact. Now, once you have that, now how I like to configure prettier is I like to use it per project. And for that, I also install my prettier.json file. This is a configuration file. This is a configuration file that allows you to do changes, or like, let's say this particular project needs tab width as 4 rather than 2, and then you just use that, right? You can configure it however you want to, and that would only apply for this particular project and not for all the files that you would open in Visual Studio Code. The next thing is I also like to do some settings. So in the settings, you go to save, and then you say format on save. So what format on save will do is every time you save a file, the prettier will run and format the file for you. So you don't have to run any command to do the formatting. So it would just take care of it, and it makes life easier. So once we have the prettier configured in the system, then we'll move on to installing a few other things. So now let's go back to the app that we did for demo, and create React app. That's why it didn't work. React app. That was supposed to be the command. I misspelled it. But anyway, so okay, it's going to take some time. So we'll come back to that. So next thing is, if you have worked with React, and just React, right? This is not this is not PCF. This is just React app that we are working with. And if you build it, you would see that it creates some files which won't be deployable. So once this gets installed, I'll show you what I'm talking about, but it's going to take some time. So let's just assume that there are going to be some discrepancies. So to avoid those discrepancies, there's another package. And this package allows us to override the settings that the React app does by itself. So React app has its own web config in the node module. So if you go here, you will go to React app, which will be somewhere in the R section. React scripts. And then in the React script, you have a lot of your config files and webpack configs and whatnot. So this is what drives the deployment, so the build process. So if you go to package.json, you'll see that the script here is having React script start, build, and test. So what it does is, when you're building it, it creates this JavaScript files and whatnot. So this actually just completed installing. So to help that process, to help make sure that we are bundling the files, where we are getting one HTML file, one JavaScript file, and one CSS file that can be deployed to the database environment, we have to do some changes. And to help those, what I like to do is I like to install another package called npm it's called React App Rewired. Okay, again, this is a dev dependency, but this doesn't need that save exact because the newer versions is the better version. But again, it is just for building purposes, so it's a dev dependency. So we'll install dev dependency here. And then this particular package also needs a configuration file. I'm going to bring in the configuration file and we'll go over it. So before we go over the configuration file, let's see if we have completed the process here. Yeah, and let's open it here and then do npm run build in the demo file. The reason why I wanted to run it in the demo file is to show you how that structure comes out to be. So as you can see, in this project, you will have this build folder getting created. That's because of the build process that I ran here. And if I expand it, you'll see that I have this index.html file, and then there's a file, there's a folder called static. If I expand that, you'll see that JS, and they're like 1, 2, 3, 4 JS, and one is the runtime JS, the other one is main JS, and they're like chunks, right? And then it has this weird numbering associated to it as well. And the important thing is, if you run the build command again, this chunk numbers would change. So it would change every time, and the references are in the index file as well. So when you go to index file and you go to this, you would see the references over here. So if you have to deploy this HTML file with the JavaScript files that it just got created, every time you run the build command and this numbers would change, you'll have to change the JavaScript files because it won't be able to reference that unless and until you come in the index file and then change the source here. But that's too much of a ask for a developer, because we are concentrating on developing things, not configuring things, right? We want it to be easy. We want to make things easier when developing. So can we put people on mute, please? Let's see.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
I'm working.
Thank you. So, and to avoid that kind of things, what we could do is we could actually override the webpack config file for the React. And the way you do it is this particular package helps us do that. This React App Rewired helps us do that. So once you have it installed, then you can add a configuration file called config override.js. And then in the path section, you can say, I don't want the build folder, I want a distribute folder. Again, if you want to keep the build folder, you can skip this part and then move on to the webpack config. In the webpack config, we are saying that don't create the runtime chunks, and then don't split the chunks that gets created. Also, we are saying the webpack config, or we are actually overriding the webpack config, saying whenever you create the file name, create the file name with prodevdemo.js, and then I'm going to copy the same name over here as well. Now, if I don't give the name and if I keep the same attribute that they have defined over here, it would have the name as main.css or main.js. So just to make sure that I have my own naming conventions, I can override it over here in the override file, right? The next step to configure this is to change the start, or this is just to make sure that my npm scripts are up to date. We have to replace the React scripts. Instead of using React script, now we use React App Rewired. That's the name of the app that we just installed, right? So we'll just replace those over here, and that's it. Now, comparing this to what we built, if I build this right now, it will run the React App Rewired command and create a folder called distribute. Instead of build, it's going to create a folder called distribute. And then inside that folder, it's going to, so once it completes, yep, it's completed. If I open this up now, I will have the index file here as expected. But now I have a JS folder, and in JS folder, I just have my JS file over here. and then my CSS file over here. So now you can see that I can deploy these files pretty easily. And in the index file, you will have the reference as needed for the index or for the JS and for the CSS. Okay, so that actually makes things simpler. So now moving on and you can see that in my distribute folder, I have like tons of stuff. Where is this coming from, right? We don't need this stuff when we are deploying, and we need clean look and feel of the app, because if I have to give this to a new developer who's going to join the team, and if he runs the build command and he looks at this and he says, oh wait, do I have to map all of this to Dataverse? Because the Dataverse developers won't know what to do with it, right? So we don't want all of this, because we are not creating a website. We are creating a web resource which is going to be hosted in Dataverse, right? So we don't need all of that. So we're going to clean that up. So going to our source file, we don't. If you have to implement test, you can keep the test file. I'm not going to do it for this demo. And you can see there are two CSS files. One is for index, one is for app. I just don't. I can keep one, right? So I'm going to remove the index file here. You don't have to remove the index.ts because that has been referred in the app. I'll show you in a bit. But then I can remove the logo, remove few other stuff. Don't remove this. Oh. Logo. Don't remove the environment.d.ts file. That's very much needed. Delete this. And then these files are what gets added to the distribute folders, the files that are in the public repo. So you can see that the favorite icon went here, the logos went here, right? That's all what you see in distribute folder. You don't want that, right? So first of all, we're going to delete the distribute folder because it gets recreated whenever you run the build command, and then clean this up as well. So we don't need any of this stuff. We'll just keep the index.html and that's it. Now, because we deleted some stuff, we are going to have tons of reference issues. So we have to clean that up. So if you go to app.ts file, you'll see that it was referencing the logo, and we have deleted the logo. So we don't want to keep that anymore. And then this is the HTML that will be getting generated. And then that HTML will be getting added. So in the index.ts, you'll see that there's a app getting called, which is this app. And then this app gets added to the root of the document.getElementById. Right. And then if you go to index.html, you see that there's a root element over here. That's where the parsed or the compiled HTML gets added in here. Okay, so that's how it works, right? And we don't want to disrupt that particular mechanism. So we just want to keep this as clean as possible. So we'll just keep it as class name over here. And you can see as I saved it, the prettier executed and then formatted my code, right? Went to index.ts file. Now we don't have index.css. We don't have report vitals. We don't have all of this stuff. So we could, now it looks pretty clean. And you can see that it formatted for 4 spaces for the tab instead of 2. The default is 2, right? So now you have all this cleaned up, but index.html still have some references for the files that we deleted from the public repo. So you have to make sure that we clean that up too. So we're just gonna clean that up. You can remove all the comments that you want. And you can change the title, because title is something that you can refer in the Dataverse. So you can always change the title to whatever is appropriate to you. And again, as I saved it, it got formatted, right? That's the beauty of prettier working. So now, so now next thing is when I'm deploying this, let me show you the app that is deployed over here. So when you're deploying this, these are the 3 things that I've deployed to my environment. You can see that the way I've deployed it is using the folder structure that normally we do, right? So I've used React and then my HTML, But then whenever my script and my CSS goes, it goes React/JS, and then the file name similar to CSS is React/CSS, and then the file name, right? To make sure that the references works properly, we have to make sure that our relative paths are correct, right? So when we are doing this, and in the HTML that gets generated, the relative path would be exactly what we have defined over here. So it would just take the current path and then just add js/prodev demo.js. And for CSS, it will do css/prodev demo.css. Now, you don't want to do dot in the name itself, because that would throw an error, because you cannot have .js because this is a file name, and then you're just providing a folder and the file name. But there is a way you can do this. So in the package.json, you can control the relative path by specifying the home page. So let's say you want to do 2-level down hierarchy. So you can do dot/dot, something like that. Now mine is 1-level down hierarchy. So I'm going to keep it as dot. Okay, that's how I will be defining my folder hierarchy based using the home page. Okay, so now we have defined our hierarchy, and now we would then install our Fluent UI. Okay, so I'm gonna install Fluent UI using npm install Fluent UI and then React package, right? So that's gonna install my Fluent UI React package. And while it's getting created, I also spoke about something we call it as component, which is the UI components that we normally create. So for that, I'm going to create a folder, say components, and then another folder called as helpers. Now, if you're working with Dataverse, you would also need connection to Web API, right? So normally what I like to do is I like to put all of those in helper classes, and I've created my own data helper class over here. So I'm just going to put it over here, but I'm not going to use it in the demo. But I just wanted to show you how you can use helper classes, and this is the class that I'm creating, right? Actually, it's a class called data helper, which has the fetch as the method in it, which takes in the fetch XML and then parses the data and then returns the data to you. So it returns you the any. Okay. Now, next thing is we'll create a component called demo component. Just the name.tsx. Okay. Now, in the demo component, we are gonna add some code in it, right? And this is the basic code for any component. So I also have an extension. I just forgot what that extension is. Is the React function. I forgot what that extension, but I think so I also had an extension which installed all the snippet for you. But anyway, I'll just use one of mine. So in this component, it's pretty straightforward. I've given my function name, and again, I'm using function components, which was already covered by Diana earlier. Like what is the difference between class components and function components, and how you declare class components and how you declare function components. So in this case, I'm using this function component, my component, and it's pretty simple right now. It just uses this as the parameter, my property, which has the text field in it, and then it just returns a div component in here. Okay, pretty straightforward. My Fluent UI has installed. So let's go ahead and then see how we can use Fluent UI inside this component as well. So to use Fluent UI in the component, you have to first import some of the controls, right? And these controls, you can easily find it if you go to Fluent UI website. and then go to controls, and you can go here, go to text field. Most of the time you'll see it in the show code. You'll see this import statements over here, which you could use it. And that's how I see where they have, like, where are they coming from. And Diana had a good post about how you should be not just including fluentui.react, but rather going to the exact component and then adding that as the import statement, just because it would bring, like, it would reduce the package size. And that's when you are installing it. Now I've installed the entire Fluent UI library, which is pretty big. And what happens is when you're building your PCF controls or your web resources, it would add all of those as references, and then it would just become too big. So just make sure that you're doing, I don't know what Diana called it. I forgot what it is, but it's a specific installation of that particular controls rather than just installing Fluent UI React package. Right. So now I've added my text field. Now, if I have to use this text field, I'll create okay. So wait. Yep, brackets are missing here. I'm just put this in the bracket. So now I'm having a div tag, and after the div tag, I'll add a text field over here. And what that text field is going to do is it's going to show me the label as testing text field, and then it's going to be read-only field, and the default value is gonna be from the property, from this property, right? And just let's save it. And now let's utilize this component in our app.tsx. Now app.tsx is your actual, like, because this entire thing is getting embedded in index.tsx, like how I explained before, right? This is the app. So you want to make sure that you are adding it to the app.tsx, right? So here, doing the same thing. Oh, actually, you know what? We'll add it inside the div tag over here. And then before we add it, we'll have to import it, right? So we'll do import statement. And let's remove this and say components, my components. Why is the IntelliSense not working? Oh, there you go. Components, and then you say demo component, right? So now you have imported your demo component over here, and then in the div tag, it's removed. Oh, I don't want that. I'm doing the same mistake again. In the div tag, I'm gonna say my components. Okay. Now, once you add my components here, it's this is the ESLint part of it. Now, ESLint is telling me that my component is missing a property, I my props. And I my props, if you go back to the component again, is exposing this text field, and it's not telling me it's optional. It's telling me it's required. If you want to say it's optional, you have to give this, which won't prompt me over here anymore. But I want all my users who are going to use these components to provide a text field over here. So if I type in text and then say this is from app. So my component is placed over here. And the next thing is I'm just gonna add a bit more complex control, but just instead of just adding a text field, I'm also gonna use a face file. So I'm gonna do that. So to face file again, I go to that Fluent UI controls, I look for the sample code, and then just use the sample code. Try to play with the sample code. It normally 80% of the time it works out with the sample code itself. They're pretty good. They're pretty detailed. So here I'm gonna just write some code to create the data. So what it's doing is it's and again this react.use memo. Dan had explained it in her session as well. So use memo, I'm just creating an example personas from the face file personas, which is coming from the sample data, and then creating this face file persona interface details. And I'm going to utilize this particular data in my face file control. So face file needs few details, like it needs the persona size, it needs the data set. So that data set is coming from here. And then that data set is actually created from samples data that is being brought from here, right? So this would create a nice UI, the look and feel that how I want it to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this control and then see if there are any errors. So again, it is building using the React app rewired. So it's creating a distribute folder over here. And once it builds, then we'll see how it looks like. So yeah, it built. Now we'll go and do a start and then see how it looks like. Load. And yeah, there you go. So now you can see that this is my component, which was static text. And then testing field was again the label of the text field. And the text field was this text field was provided from the app.tsx. And it's bringing this from the property itself. And this is a face file that got created. Now, while you have all of this and you can deploy it. So I'm going to close this app and then close the running. So you can deploy it as you usually deploy. So you have this index.html, you have the JS file over here, and then you have the CSS file over here. And then you can just deploy like normally you would do in the HTML web resources or JavaScript or CSS, right? Once you have deployed it, this is the app that I created using this HTML, JS, and CSS files. And this is the app where you search for Spider-Man, and then you can just see the details. Now, as you can see, everything is built from Fluent UI. Like these are the capabilities. Like you have this side panel, which really feels native to model-driven app. And it even the controls like the labels and all of those does make you look like Fluent UI as well. Now, if you don't want to do Fluent UI, and if you want to do something like if you really want to do something custom and not use Fluent UI at all, but you have a requirement where you have to build some complex UI controls, you can still do that. For example, like what I have done here is I've created this control where this doesn't come from Fluent UI controls, but this is all custom HTML5 and React based. And what it does is the way it works is if you click on show details here, it shows the details for Iron Man. But if you click on show details here, it will show the details for Spider-Man. So it differentiates based on what your data is, what you're clicking. And that's all happening because of the React capturing the state and capturing what components you're clicking, right? And again, lot of use of React hooks in here as well. So now, because we have a few minutes left, I'm going to also show you how to debug it. Okay, so now in your Fiddler, I'm using the classic Fiddler. You can also use the Fiddler everywhere that was showcased by Ivan in his session. Here, it's pretty straightforward. The rules that I have is I'm using the regex. And what it's doing is it's looking at any website that has web resources /POWM React /JS superhero script.js. Now this particular thing is matching what is in the Dataverse. So if I go here, it's matching this JS script over here, right? And then it just has the name web resource. One thing you can also validate is if you do Control F12 and then look for the superhero script, which is already here. So you can do Control P and then look for superhero script.js. And what you could do is you could right click over here anywhere and then say reveal in sidebar. And it reveals that particular file in the sidebar. You right click on it and then you say copy link address. Okay, then you go to Fiddler and then the rule that you have, right? You can test that regex rule by pasting that URL over here. And if it turns aqua, like this is the aqua color, I think I'm not sure with the colors. And it also tells you here that the pattern matches this site URL. And that's how you would do your testing for the regex as well. So I've done that. I've done two rules, one for my CSS file and one for my script file. So and then I'm pointing it to my local file as well. So if I go to my local code, which is my this is my local code. If I do any changes over here and build it, that would be reflected directly on the Dataverse without even deploying it. So let's try to do that. So let's say we just say this is a test from local machine. So I just made that change and I'm going to do a build. Now, building it is essential because our path is in the Fiddler is actually pointing to the distribute folder, which is this particular folder, right? So we want to make sure that this particular file gets rebuilt and not the TSX, because TSX has nothing to do it. When you build it, that's when the distribute folder gets created. So you just build that, build the app, and once it's built, the JavaScript files gets regenerated, the types or the CSS file gets regenerated, and the index.html gets regenerated. And you can, again, you don't want to deploy it because you're doing some local testing. So you can just do these changes, make sure that the distribute folder files are regenerated again, keep the Fiddler open, go here, and then just do Control F5. And fingers crossed, let's hope that this works. And there you go. Now you can see the code from the local machine rather than from the server itself. So yeah, that's all what I have to show you guys. And now questions. And again, repeating the same information that I had presented earlier, you can connect with me on social media, or you can even become my sponsor. The links are on the on the screen. So let's go over some questions. Are there any questions, Diana?
Just a second. I thought there was something about showing how you step through debugging.
Yeah, that's the only one
I saw Gomez. Yeah, so Daniel Alberto Gomez asked, will you share this code? So yes, good question. I actually just released or made my repo public. So this is the repo, and I'm going to paste it in the chat over here. That repo gives you the folder structures, the code that I've created for that hero app that I've created, but it also explains how to initialize the React app, how to configure Prettier, how to configure React app rewired, how to install Fluent UI, how to develop and build, and all the other details are in this. So let's go on top. And yeah, Material UI is also good. You can use Material UI as well. Just if you use Material UI, and I've used Material UI in past for creating web resources or creating even creating PCF controls. But the thing is, it looks different to what Dataverse would look like, or components in Dataverse would look like. So if your users are okay with it, if they really want to use Material UI, you can certainly use that. Or even you can use combination of Material UI with Fluent UI. They don't contradict each other as far as I know. Is there any way of stepping through the code while debugging? Yes, there is a so if you are already pointing to your local files, you can. So here, if I search for super hero, there should be a hero helper. There you go. So here is, so how it works is, let me go to my code base. Here, the JS is having a map file. Now that map file is telling the dev tools that where the actual source code is, and you can actually see your TypeScript TSX files in your source control, and you can put in debuggers over here to debug your code. I think so. Hopefully that answers your question. And then what's the best way to call external API like weather API in HTML? Well, because this is HTML web resources, you would just do a regular web API call, like how you would do a web API call for anything else, like just do fetch, fetch not the fetch from Dataverse, but the fetch from I might have this in the code. Okay, there you go, API helper. Okay, cool. So I have that in the sample as well. When I'm actually doing an API call to my Azure web service, so you can look at the code here. And I'm using the out-of-the-box fetch, and it's pretty straightforward. And I don't understand what Nilesh is asking. PCF question. So it's not PCF. Again, as I said, it's a web resource. And the way you build web resource is not just using HTML5 and just plain HTML, but rather than you level up, right? This is what we have learned from PCF is you have to upskill, you have to learn new things. And React was one thing that I had to learn. I am now, once I've learned it, I was impressed by how capable it was and where you could extend it and not just use it in PCF, but also use it to create apps and use it as HTML web resources rather than just PCF. Because PCF can only, as of today, you can only bind it to a field or a data set only, right? So what if you want to create, so for example, the app that I've created over here is, over here is actually on the sitemap. And if it is on the sitemap, there is no way I could have used PCF because PCF doesn't give me the ability to add it on the sitemap directly, like how I could add HTML web resource on the sitemap. So that kind of gives you, a requirement where you might want to use React app for creating HTML web resources than PCF controls. How do we make similar calls in PCF components for external API? It would exactly be the same of how I have demoed it over here, because fetch is not restricted. But now, if you're using any of the, so this was one of the things that Hemant talked about, Kaushik talked about, is that external API call, which would make your PCF controls as premium, which is not right now. We don't have the ability to do that, but eventually if you're using any of the fetch which goes and connects to an external connector, which is a premium connector, then that external API calls will be logged, and that's how they will be tracking your licensing thing. I don't know how it's going to all work out, but as of now, we don't have any restrictions, so you can feel free to use fetch. Can you show how to add to solution? So it's a pretty simple, straightforward thing. You have your CSS files, JavaScript files, you go to your solutions over here, and then you just say new, other, and say web resources, which opens up in a new window. And it's going to take time because this is going on that classic interface, because adding web resources is not yet converted into the modern experience. So it might take some time to load it. And that's why I didn't want it to show it during the demo, is because I know it would take time to load that page. But yeah, once it loads, you give the name, you give the display name, you give the localized name, and then you just upload a file. You just directly upload a file from that particular location, and that should be it. Let me try to open this one, so at least you'll have some idea. It's not loading. Oh, there you go. Just loaded. Let's see. Come on. Yep. And then here you would give, let's say, pro dev / react.html. And then I normally give some good name, logical. And then you would name your HTML here, and then you would select the type here, HTML, and then say upload file, and that's it. And then you do this 3 times, one for HTML, one for JavaScript, and one for CSS. I don't see any more questions, so I will stop presenting. Okay, guys, don't forget to leave your feedback. There are prizes to be won. Unfortunately, we were thinking of giving away some prizes at the Q&A session, but we wanted to give as much time as possible for answering the questions, because we had good panel, so we didn't want it to lose that time, so we didn't try to give away prizes in that particular session. So what we are going to do is, there were a few categories that we had already selected. We are going to and some of the prizes are going to be based on the feedback that you give. There are going to be some random winners from the feedback form as well. So do make sure that you're adding your feedback on the sessions, and we are going to pick some winners, and then those winners will be announced via email at some point, or maybe on 29th. But that information will be shared to you at some point. Probably look out for the Twitter, look out for the emails from the community, or messages from me, or Diana, or Victor, or Raz. But yeah, it was great. Raz, if you're online, do you want to have some words?
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. Yes. So once again, I also want to big thank you for Danish, because if you don't notice Danish, I think you're running at maybe 10%, aren't you? For people who don't know Danish, he's running at 10% because he's probably been awake all night, preparing and managing stuff. So just a big applause and thanks to Danish, as well as Diana as well. Well done, Diana, and Victor and everyone, and especially the speakers, Scott and all the speakers. We had Benedict doing 2 sessions as well. We had also Julian doing two sessions. So there was a lot, a lot of the speakers really went out of their way today, and really made this a great event. So I just want to thank everyone, and they will be announcing the prizes. I believe it's the last session for the Power Apps Developer Bootcamp, which is next Saturday. So the winners will be announced. I know some of the winners are already aware from the previous weeks. We can see Cheryl on there, who's one of the winners, and Shagar as well. So, but yeah, we will be announcing the rest of the winners from today next week. So make sure you join us next Saturday for the final day of the Power Apps Developer Bootcamp. So that's my final words. Danish, do you have any, or does Victor? Victor as well. Obviously, Victor was very much involved in a lot of the organization of the Q&A and many of those things as well. So big thanks to Victor as well. Any final words from you, Victor, or from Danish or from Diana?
Nothing from me. I just want to say thank you for all for attending and being patient throughout the process. And I think so there were little hiccups between the recordings, I guess, but we all sorted it out. And again, yeah, 29th is the last day. And okay, Victor is out. So Victor, you want to talk about 29th and then?
Yes. So next week, we're gonna have the final day of the bootcamp, as Raz mentioned, and the focus of that particular weekend will be the backend, Power Platform backend, a lot of ALM, virtual tables. So there are lots of talks on that, and we're gonna have a Q&A as well. And the theme for the Q&A will be Fusion development. I believe Scott Duro mentioned Fusion a few times during his presentation, so we'll be talking about it. There is a lot of I don't know if we should say concern, but curiosity on the transition from being Dynamics 365 development into Fusion. So we have a good panel joining us. Scott will be there, Danish. We have Daryl Field Topness will join us as well. So there is good insight from folks coming from citizen development as well as pro devs, just talking about Fusion. So I don't think you want to miss that out. But yeah, next weekend it'll be late night Friday for me, Saturday for folks near to the GMT. And we'll have Ryan Cunningham, one of the senior program managers for Power Platform, doing the keynote for us next Saturday. So I'm pretty excited. I'm still a little dizzy. I don't know if you can see it from everything that was presented today. I'm still trying to assimilate a little bit of it, but we have more coming. So you have a week to get back to normal if you can.
Thank you, Victor. So yeah, look forward to seeing Victor next week. So I guess we can wrap up with just sharing the links to the books again, the discount codes. That offer expires this month, I believe. So I'll share that again in the chat for those who still want to take advantage of that. Yeah, so I think we could end today's note on May the Power be with you all, and thanks once again to everyone and to all the speakers, and yeah, wishing Danish a bit of a rest, maybe catch up on some sleep as well.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.
So take care, guys. Have a great weekend. Rest up. Spend some time with your families, and see you all next Saturday.
All right, thanks, Russ. Thanks, Danish, Diana,
Thank you.
everybody else who's on the